running at a bit of a delay, a bit late, so we're going to start the next piece of the program before everybody's come in. I hope that's okay with the panelists, that people will be wandering in probably as you're talking. The goal of this panel is to address a real dilemma, which is that on the one hand, the technologies that Homeland Security type companies develop are critical and increasingly critical to society. On the other, the typical startup ecosystem is not well suited to supporting those companies, those types of companies. And the job of this panel is to help think through how to break this dilemma. How startup Homeland Security technology companies can get off the ground and grow and do the things that they have to do in the absence of a sort of generally supportive startup ecosystem. So we've got three great panelists and a great moderator. Gideon Ben Zvi. I guess each of you will introduce yourself shortly, so I'll just say names. Gideon Ben Zvi, Goren, Saar, Dickman, and Ron Moritz, the moderator. Ron is former CTO of Symantec in the States, led the security initiative of CA Associates, now spends a lot of time with OurCrowd, a coffee startup, all kinds of other stuff. And maybe I'll turn it over to you, Ron, to kick off the discussion.
Thank you, Gideon. So, you know, when I think of this Homeland Security topic, and we certainly saw some very interesting companies this morning, it's always about, you know, speaking to the heart. You know, it's very emotional. You get to see things that actually save lives or protect people, protect troops, protect civilians, pick out terrorists. It's a very sexy concept. When we think of other types of technology that I'm typically involved with, cybersecurity in particular, oftentimes I think it's sexy, but it's not really translated the same way when you actually talk to investors and other people. But what they do see is opportunities to make money, right? We see companies like Waze, like Viber. I believe we have one of the founders of Viber here later today. Other companies that make spectacular returns, spectacular exits. And, you know, to some degree, when we think about what is success, what is a measure of success of any startup from an investor's point of view, it's about the return on investment. Now, Homeland Security may not have the same type of return, but certainly has maybe bigger impact on society in general. So we've put together a group of folks that have certainly different experiences and different perspectives on what success means and how you measure success in Homeland Security. The way we're going to run this panel is that I'm going to first give each one an opportunity to introduce themselves and the companies that they're involved with today. Perhaps to some degree there's some relevance in companies they've done before. And then we'll get into really only about 3 questions, although each question has a lot of nuance. And then we'll open it up to you guys and engage you in some of the questions you have as you're thinking about companies or ideas and startup ideas in Homeland Security. So I'm actually going to start at the other end with Gideon and we'll work back.
Hi, my name is Gideon Ben Zvi. Do you hear me well? So I was lucky to co-found and found 6 companies, and in the last 8 years I'm an investor, and then what's called an angel investor and VC, and BriefCam is a company which I was honored to co-found. And okay, and
לתשומת לב כולם, הכנס ממשיך ואתם מתבקשים להיכנס לאודיטוריום. תודה.
Okay, I thought I missed my flight. So, and actually BriefCam, if I can add one more word in the introduction, I think is a very interesting example.
אתם מתבקשים להיכנס לאודיטוריום. תודה.
I'll wait a few minutes and restart when they all in. Okay, I think BriefCam is an example of what we see in the HLS world, that the value and the revenues are not totally synchronized. You can often find companies that revenues would come from one source, and this source can generate the value of the regular conservative multiply, while the hype and the consumer and touching more people, sometimes without any revenue, it's where you get the value of the company. And this is a challenge, very typical challenge for the security world. I don't suggest a solution for it. I only raise it as an issue, as a challenge. We deal with it in BriefCam, and I guess this will follow probably part of your questions, and so please, Gal.
My name is Gal Goren. I'm the VP of R&D and Engineering at My name is Gal Goren. I'm the VP of R&D and Engineering at Roboteam. Roboteam is a Tel Aviv-based company. We're dealing with designing, manufacturing, and integrating robotic ground systems for the defense sector. Roboteam has already has 80 employees, and we develop multiple robotic systems, such as the small robotics vehicles, so soldiers can toss it to a room, get a feedback back as a video or audio, man-carried robots that can climb stairs, and big robots like that weighs about 250 kilos, can carry a lot of weight, weapons, and other sensors. And we are now selling mainly to the US, IDF, and around the world.
Thank you. Saar Dickman, former CEO of TowerSec and co-founder, one of the three of the company. Right now I'm VP Automotive Cybersecurity at Harman. We're doing a simple job securing connected cars by software. We're selling globally in the US, Europe, and the Far East. Primarily two software products that are being sold to manufacturers and key suppliers in the industry.
Terrific. So with that introduction, let's dive right into the real heart and soul, which is how do you make money in some of these companies where Homeland Security is at least a piece of the focus. Now, granted, not all of the companies here have a pure Homeland Security focus, but some of them may have started that way and may have pivoted at some point and shifted to perhaps a consumer market. But one of the challenges typically with Homeland Security is that we typically find that our first customer, our primary customer, is a government, usually at the national level. Sometimes it's civilians, so it could go down to more of a local level. But it's a different type of sales and a different type of selling cycle than you would find in a typical commercial company selling to a corporation, selling to consumers. And so that changes things. And governments also oftentimes have to work within set parameters that corporations don't have, such as formal tenders, public tenders, and their sales cycles, their process of evaluation, the process of actually getting in and beginning to talk to these customers, and then going through the sales cycle. Sometimes you often can't do it alone, certainly not as a startup. You have to go through an integrator. So it's a very complicated business, and I wanted to actually throw out a number of questions on this topic of sales cycle, including trying to understand the experiences and perhaps some of the learning that was done along the way. So with that, I'll open it up. I don't know who wants to take the first shot at this.
Okay. So I think the automotive industry is quite similar to the government. The typical sales cycle is 3 to 4 years before you're getting the first, we call it award, but you get the money just when you deliver, which means a year or two down the road, which means from the beginning it takes 4 or 5 years for your first backs to get into a bank account. the way we are trying to solve or to tackle this challenge, and again, this is very subjective experience, although I already manage and sell more than one company, is run and meet your customers very fast, which means if you define your target market as the US or Europe, and you think the Israeli customers are more accessible, don't go and chase the IDF and not necessarily at the first step, or the local guys. Try to meet your the actual target customers. On your way there, you'll find that you have to cross export control, you have to cross flights, you have to build your sales force, you have to understand the lingo. Sometimes in different domains you have different lingo, but eventually down the road, each forge your value proposition to the customers. And at least my biggest lesson learned and from the past, and definitely think that we did in TowerSec, is almost from the first day, from the first or the second slide deck that we had, we flew out to, in our case, to Michigan and Germany, and we presented the concept to the customers, and for 90% they said it's total bullshit, it won't work here, because we have regulations, we have everything that you have in the government. We have regulations, you have to have wide shoulders, present your budgets for the next 5 years, and then we went back and we actually changed some of our value proposition and business model accordingly. The second part is understand your sales cycle chain, which means if you're a tiny company from Israel, and Israel is tiny, when you talk about global markets, usually there is bigger whales communicating with governments, and try to do pincer maneuver. Try to work in two ways. One, meet your customer, build the confidence that you have a proper solution, and in other way, in another branch, try to find the great or the biggest integrator. And although you know that they will cut some of your revenues, you may fear of competition, but still, in the end of the day, getting to your customer and say, hey, this is my value proposition, I know how to work with this big integrator, will pave your way into sales and definitely confidence and getting the RFIs out there.
I believe that you hear me? So I believe that startup in its initial way, especially in the HLS, has great programs of R&D programs, like in IDF, in MAFAT, in TSWG, CTTSO. So you can get funds right in the initial, at the initial beginning. You can get funds, and what's beautiful in these funds is that you get these funds to develop the product. And also, they promise to buy your product back. Okay, so it's a nice package, and I believe that this is the way that you should start. In this way, you can establish the technology very well, make it firm, and the only way to succeed and to get higher values for your product is to be able to participate in big tenders. And tenders is something that is quite difficult for a startup. And the only way to be able to do it is to be very close to the customer. So I understand what you are saying. Being with the customer is the most important thing. Being with the troops on the ground, understand exactly what they need, what are your problems in the product, how do you make it better. Fix it as fast as you can, show the customer that you will bring a better product in the next round, and I believe that this process will give your product a great value that to your question, to the investors, you will be able to transfer this value later maybe to someone that is not interested in the HLS, but in the consumer market.
Well, Saar and Gal covered most of the things I wanted to say, so I will try to add only new things. I think this one is a problematic one. long sales cycle means dilution. As longer the sales cycle, you have to make more fundraising, and you need more funds, because once you finally have the sales, it's usually the first one will not be very profitable, and it might be even a sale which is not cash flow positive. And again, the company goes into more and more selling shares and selling product. And this is something which is not typical to HLS. As longer the sales cycle, it's more challenging financially. There are some ways to overcome it and bypasses, but at the end of the day, big project, long sales cycle, it's expensive to the shareholders. What are the ways to go over it? One of them, as mentioned, Saar, is the short-term wins, is to try to find some deals which you can work with and can generate in your name and pick some money that is on the floor, and which both pays some of the bills, of course not all of the bills, but can show that actually the company has a business sense. It's not only selling shares all day and issuing shares, it's also try to sell products. And the other thing, we call it the double dip. And actually most of the companies I know, there is a stage that you pay your salespeople commission to make sales, and you pay also your integrators and your partners commission or margins for the sales that your salespeople bring them. And this, you feel very bad with it, but there is everyone who say, I cannot live with it. At the end of the day, he doesn't live with it, but doesn't sell. There is a long stage, which I think until the company is $10 or $15 million, that companies are suffer from double dip stage. And as for Israelis, where we have a very strong fire syndrome, it's very hard to accept, but this is how it works. The other thing, I think there is also in HLS some Uberization of the world. Some things which are, you don't sell only to the very big guys and then sell to the distributors and then to the dealers, and then that there are some things which are, you can try and create some kind of a direct model. Not in all the products, you cannot sell a robot of $1 million to someone, of course, but in some companies, it's a diversify the companies and to spread thin, that you cannot do too many activities at the same time. But for some companies, a model, enhancing the model that it will be more Uberized, if I can use the word Uber for that. It's a solution, it's not for everyone, but it definitely, and here you have the conflict of a value versus sales. That the sales bring revenue and money, but not the value. But the hype and the Uberization bring the value, but not necessarily the money. But it brings you more investors.
I think you actually made an interesting point that I experienced myself in a non-HLS company, but specific to the idea that, maybe I'll hold it here, specific to the idea that you're paying twice. And I had a specific reseller opportunity in the United States that actually enabled me to get into certain customers that, knowing the procurement process at those customers, commercial customers, would have taken me at least a year to a year and a half to go through that process as a startup. Hello? Yeah. Okay. We're going to abandon that one. Hello? Okay. So what they did, they actually, I had to pay them 50%. Right? And my own salespeople, I had to pay them as well. So seemingly, I lost a lot of money in the process. But in reality, it gave me faster access to the markets, and it overcame the biggest hurdle, which was the long tail procurement cycle. So I like that comment. That was very useful. But the other things I heard was, in terms of objection handling, get there early, get there active, be in their face, and not necessarily take the shortcut of trying to work only in Israel, go out to the field. So some interesting comments there. Related to this, the next topic that we want to try to cover and hone in on is this idea of the VC ecosystem. Where do you get your funding? And as was pointed out, some of these companies require quite a bit of funding given the long tail development cycle. right? It's almost like med tech and biotech. It takes a long time to develop some of these products, to test these products, to validate them in field tests before the first sales actually come in. In the case of automotive, you have a 3-4 year sales development process on a vehicle, so long tail cycles. So given the amount of money that has to go into this, many VCs have shied away from Homeland Security. Now, I don't know if this is new news or old news, but I happened to see a Twitter this morning about the Israel Homeland Security organization that launched an accelerator in Israel, the first I think that I've heard of in the Homeland Security space, so that's encouraging. But generally, it's tough to get the money. So I'd like to actually hear from the three groups here, and of course we have an investor as well, to understand where the money comes from, how you deal with the objections of the venture or traditional investor on return on investment, and perhaps some sense of, does it get easier as you go through the process, as you get closer to revenue, as you get more advanced and finish the POCs and actually have successful field tests?
Because I have a hard stop, may I start? I apologize before I have a hard stop, and because it started later, I would need to escape in the middle. But I would say that as long as we have 0% interest in the world, and as long as people feel insecure, then HLS together with pornography and beer are recession-proof industries. So this is the good news for investors. That's always the people would need, would require Homeland Security. Furthermore, there is less and less feeling of safety in the world, and HLS is it's definitely not a hype kind of technology, but it's steady. I want to give something from perspective of the big companies. If you look about, I'll mention in a second, huge companies which were in old economy that got rid of the main industry in order to focus on urbanization and security and climate. And if you take the most blunt example, two examples are Honeywell and Johnson Control. Johnson Control sold the batteries, which is the #1 in the world, and the chairs for cars, which are #2 in the world, that they generate $30 billion company. They were left only with $13 billion company to focus only on urbanization, including Homeland Security. Honeywell did a very similar process. IBM made a division for Safe City, which is a separate division in IBM. Hitachi and Mitsubishi, both of them sold the consumer electronic in order to focus on urbanization. And you see it in ABB, Schneider Electric, several of the big companies, those who start to generate all the M&A that at the end of the day, the small companies been purchased by a bigger one and by bigger one, and generate the M&A process because of the need of Homeland Security and because of the need of urbanization. Here is another word, just the last one before I escape. Homeland Security and urbanization are getting closer. And this is very good news for the Homeland Security startups, because urbanization is a good trend. And urbanization, where in the first year, 2014 was the first year that half of the world were living in cities and not in villages. And this made the change, because Homeland Security is a very strong part and very, very authentic part of urbanization, it helps the companies that are dealing with Homeland Security to be part of it. I apologize again, and I'm sure you're going to do it well without me. Thanks.
So, as you said, Ron, to VCs, it's very difficult. They feel it's kind of difficult to invest capital in a HLS company. What I found that make these VCs look at you in a different light is because VCs are interested in liquidation of the money, so they are looking on your revenues. So in HLS, there are a few points you can consider that will work to the benefit of yours. For example, we all know that tomorrow world terrorism is not going to end, right? So you have a steady market, which you can't say in a consumer market sometimes. In addition, the customers will guide you exactly how to make your product exactly as how they want it to be. And these customers have a lot of billions of dollars around the world that they have to take out. They have to expend the money. Okay, so if you are winning a tender, then you have a safe income every year. And this will reflect in your P&Ls. And I believe that this is something that can get you closer to the VCs. In addition, I believe that VCs wants to see if you are making your own solution or you are in a competition. So I believe that you should always aim, especially in the HLS, you should always aim to be in a competitive world. You should always see who is your greatest competitor that you want to be like. You should investigate it and try to get into direct competition with it. I believe that investors find it much more appealing than a standalone company that is trying to figure out what is the market of its solution.
So we decided to jump off the cliff. We didn't want to take any VC money from a shareholders and founders perspective. We actually kept the major portion of our shares all the way. And it may sound very boring getting back to the customers, but we know how it works. You're getting into you're flying to a conference in Europe. You're meeting someone handling your business card, and then you have, I have a deal with X, Y, or that. This is not things that VCs appreciate, to say the least. But if you go out there and meet your customer, then in the specific meeting with the VCs that you set, in the end of the meeting, you can say, okay, this is the phone number of my prospect, of the client I met. You can give him a call for my due diligence. And in one side, on the other side, you presented a solid business model. I think your way into raising the funds is much easier. So again, bringing the markets into the VC room, presenting solid business model and unique selling point. Everything starts, by the way, with the confidence of your technology or your product. If you're me too, I don't believe no one will invest in your company or in your venture. But eventually, if you bring the markets into the VC table and present solid case and present solid business model, they will go with you.
So I want to go back to a point that was raised here. It's interesting that Elbit's venture in cybersecurity, Elbit, of course, being one of Israel's large defense contractors, traditional defense contractors, is now one of Israel's biggest cybersecurity vendors as well. And what's interesting on the topic of big tenders, when Elbit Cyber Int, I believe they call it, division, the security division, cybersecurity division reports deals. They report deals that are $20 or $30 million in size. Checkpoint, which is also a well-known cybersecurity company in Israel, can never, ever report deals of that size. Checkpoint's deals, the majority of them are, 50,000, 100,000, maybe a big deal is 500,000. Once a year, they get a few deals, a handful of deals that may be over $1 million. So it's interesting when you're playing in a different sphere, as Gal pointed out, in a sphere where there's actually some very big dollars. When you do succeed in getting those tenders and winning those tenders, the dollars are there and the recurring annual revenue, because these are multi-year contracts that you typically win, are there. What I didn't necessarily hear, though, is how through the process, and maybe Gal, you have some experience with this specific to your company, you don't lose the focus and you don't get discouraged that you get turned down quite often, especially here in Israel. There aren't that many HLS investors here in Israel, maybe a few angels, but not the traditional funds, and those monies may be available elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a good question. Because of these long cycles, you have to stay focused and to keep your employees in focus and keep doing what they come to do every day and not be disappointed. I believe that the only way you can deal with it is delivery. You have to find at each given time in the company, you have to find a customer to deliver to him something. It doesn't matter what. It can be a package of something to be integrated in a larger system, or it can be a tailor-made solution that is not necessarily your actual product that you want to go to the tender with. You have to find something to deliver. Delivery makes your product mature, no matter what. It's not something, it's not only another deadline to finish a product, to release a product. It's going to a customer. So it by definition will mature your product. I think that in Israel, we have, since we are all, the HLS company are very in tight connection with the IDF, you can find a lot of opportunities to take your systems and deploy it in the IDF. There are a lot of programs and you can talk with them directly or indirectly. Most of the employees know the IDF very well, so they always know who they can talk to. And I believe that in the time between the big revenues of the tenders, you can keep your employees with small revenues, but they have to be occupied with deliveries. And another benefit in the HLS industry is that when you come to work, you always feel that you are doing something that is important, that is actually saving life. And I believe it's another bonus in the meantime.
All right, so we'll move on in the interest of time as well, but I do want to get back to this concept of ultra-conservative government-type buyers. And again, related to that, the need to oftentimes find a partner to get you into those opportunities going direct, other than perhaps in Israel, is oftentimes a challenge, although I think some of the comments I heard suggest that maybe some of that is changing as well. Urbanization may actually accelerate some of these opportunities. But alongside of governments, and especially if we're talking about third world versus first world, where there are in fact some homeland security opportunities, there's all sorts of other questions that come up, such as bribes, I guess is the term, which are, we know, is illegal for Israeli citizens as well as American citizens, and certainly for probably a number of other citizens of a number of other companies. Let's talk a little bit about how we deal with the government conservative approach and how we think about opportunities in the first world versus the third world.
I can say that ahead of time you have to understand that you're going to invest in building your network, and it takes time. Actually in every country you have the local branch of Israel, of the local branch that promotes new businesses, or even in some cases you'll have to pay to the right lobbyists to create your network, and it takes time. But once you're there, it's not like the same brotherhood we have in Israel in the IDF, but you get the level of intimacy in every industry, and specifically on the HLS. I can give an example for Michigan, which I'm there a lot. We build a relationship with a General Dynamic land system. So it's part of the network, because one of our goals, and we decided to build the relationship, and it takes 6 months, a year. You have to plan 4 or 5 flights, couple of dinners, the right events to pick, and you build your network. But once you are there, you understand the ecosystem, because every business environment has its own ecosystem. But once you're there and you understand it, you can actually map the ecosystem, going through all the bureaucracy or dealing with the government, or even the key supplier to the government is much, much easier. And I can tell you, Israel government is definitely support companies that are going out there, and not in tours for small high-tech companies going from Israel to present, not necessarily in such tours, but more of the local branches or the local Jewish branches or the local business branches that has some agreement with Israel or relationship with Israel. They're actually very efficient.
You are right, Saar, and I think that when you target your main market, let's say that it's in the US, for example, then you have to sit there. You have to be there. You have to open another office there. You have to understand exactly what are the channels, that all the information of the opportunities. How do you get to the opportunities? You have to put your hands on it. And it's full expertise, and this is the only way to do it. And if you do it right, I believe that in some point you can even influence the requirements of what the customer is what he wants to get. And this is a major issue, because if you can influence about the requirements, you will have a better chance to win the competition.
I just want to add here, I think it's totally different for a company with a couple of millions in their bank account or the 100K company. And 100K company, I can assure you that I drove buses in the US, which is not so nice in some places, and I took the back seat in airplanes, but mainly, and some of the people in this room were very helpful in this one. Actually, I planned a lot in building the network with a friend of a friend that meet me with another friend that is eccentric in his area, and in one week flight that cost in a Turkish low cost $700, I'm talking on the US, you're flying there, you're sleeping in a mid and low hotels, driving those buses, meeting some friend, and on the third flight, you're not local, but people knows you. So it can be done under the 100K budget with the slide deck that you have, with some reference letter that you have from the IDF or something else. Those first steps will open the doors, and then it will be much easier to convince investor, even if they are friends and family investor or small or private investors, to move forward. But I think it definitely can be done. We did it.
I saw nobody took the bribery question, but that's okay. I did promise that we'd have some time. I'm sure there's questions, so your turn. Questions? Yes.
Let's assume you have the technology. I think you have to have at least one salesperson in the company, and not selling the product, selling the company. And because if you have this salesperson that can sell the company, he can bring the next money, next round. He can open the door, and usually when you're talking about small companies, it's a multi-purpose or one-man show that can do many things. But I think you have to have it. If you don't have it, you can't move to the next stage. But if you have it, then it's not easy, but it's all sales. Okay, you can do it with a slide deck, you can do it with a product, but if a very good technological team, no one represent the technology out there in the right place, it's more of a local M&A or local bids.
You do have the feedback from the customer and says, look, you have to do additional part here, additional part there, additional part. But all this words are costing a lot of money. They're coming now from our pocket.
That's again, sharing from the automotive industry. It took us 3 years when no VC and no client believe that they're going to be automotive cyber security market. It's an emerging market. Right now, it's not a mature market. And we're like the prophet at the gate saying, okay, in 3 years you have, and I begged for money from I didn't beg, I sell the company from, it's not friend and family, private investors in the US, but I think at that time, 80% of my flights were raising money, selling the company to customers and partners. That was my job, at least.
I think that there is no other way but to find someone that will use your product, even if it's one, even if it's a tiny customer, it doesn't matter. I believe that at the beginning, someone has to use it, because you will get a lot, the value that you will get from this free customer will be much higher a few months or years later. And I believe that if someone will use it, someone that you can go to VC after it and say, hey, this guy is using it, and he wants more, but I can't give him more because so and so and so. I believe this is the way, but there is no easy way. You have to...
Personally, I don't believe in free products, and I implemented free demos, products, presenting our products out there, or demoing the way we want. We did obviously free part of the sales process, but even for a 70% discount, but never for free. Usually on the other side, I wanted to see the person who is charged and the budget. If I don't have the two, he's not my client.
One more question. I saw a hand in the back. Yeah.
I see a lot of, there is a huge hype around accelerate goals. It's out in different companies worldwide. However, I didn't say that they put any cent of money in installation. I see a lot of meetings. So, do you see any companies in the future that big companies, such as the automotive space or the government space, will be partners or will put some budget in those startups?
So I'll begin by reminding everybody that we're here because the U.S. government, in partnership with the Israeli government, is actually sponsoring the prizes for today. So, thank you for the government support. But as far as companies, I only have to look south to Beersheba for an example, and that's Lockheed Martin that 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, came and established their first Israel office. They didn't even have a sales office in Israel for all the Lockheed Martin products we buy for Homeland Security. They didn't even service Israel out of Israel. They serviced Israel out of Europe. The other important point of this particular office is that it's an R&D office. It's actually not a sales office. It is a commitment that Lockheed Martin made to Israeli cybersecurity as a first business channel, but has subsequently expanded to include non-cybersecurity technology relevant to Lockheed Martin. And it's also important to note that this is one of only 3 offices, R&D offices of Lockheed Martin that's outside of the United States. The other 2 are in England and in Australia. So there's an example of a multinational, in this case American defense company, that recognized the value of Israel initially for cybersecurity, but also being aware of other homeland security solutions and in addition to that, has in fact invested in at least one, I think there's actually more companies in Israel, startups in Israel, and not an insignificant amount of investment. So that's one data point. The other data point is that I am seeing from the investor side both scouting missions of multinationals looking for homeland security solutions, as well as others. I tend to stay more in cybersecurity. But we're seeing more and more companies. General Motors has just made another commitment to an already operating laboratory. General Electric has been here in Israel for quite some time. Arguably, both of those companies are in the Homeland Security category and receptive to talking to Homeland Security startups as well. So, and we're seeing Asian companies as well. Big Asian manufacturing companies from Japan that actually have corporate VC offices in Israel. Honda not only has set up a R&D center in Israel, but also a VC arm. So we are seeing more and more of that. How directly it will impact Homeland Security will be seen, but maybe this accelerator structure, Homeland Security Accelerator, will be a good starting point. So maybe when we get back together next year, we'll actually be able to talk about some of those advances. So first of all, thank you for the panelists, including Gideon, who left a little bit early, and for you guys for enduring this. I'm going to turn it back over to Gideon.
Thanks very much. Great job. Thank you. Thanks, God.